At 15, Fatima existed in a fragile in-between space where the world expected understanding but rarely offered it. She was no longer a child whose mistakes were forgiven without thought, yet not old enough to be trusted with her own truth. Her life moved quietly within the walls of a house that looked ordinary from the outside but carried unspoken rules inside. Rules about obedience, silence, and knowing when to disappear. Fatima had learned early how to take up less space. She walked softly through hallways, closed doors gently, and spoke only when necessary. Not because she lacked thoughts or feelings, but because she had learned which ones were welcome and which ones caused tension. Silence, for her, had become a form of safety. Her home was not loud with chaos or violence. It was calm in a way that left no room for error. Expectations lived in every corner. Her parents believed deeply in order, reputation, and appearances. They believed love was proven through discipline and control. Affection was rare, approval conditional, and disappointment heavy. Fatima's sister stood in contrast to everything Fatima was. Where Fatima withdrew, her sister advanced. Where Fatima hesitated, her sister acted. She carried confidence like armor and spoke with certainty even when she was wrong. Their parents gravitated toward that certainty, mistaking volume for honesty and confidence for truth. The difference between the sisters was never openly discussed, yet it shaped everything. Fatima became the one who was assumed capable of handling disappointment, the one who could absorb blame quietly, the one who would not cause a scene. At 15, Fatima understood patterns even if she did not yet have language for them. She knew which moods to avoid, which questions to leave unanswered, which moments required compliance rather than explanation. She had grown skilled at reading faces, at sensing when affection was available and when distance was safer. Her room was small but orderly. Every object had a place, not because she was naturally organized, but because order created predictability. Predictability reduced risk. From her window, she could see the street stretching beyond the house, leading somewhere unknown. She often wondered what it felt like to move freely through the world without constantly measuring consequences. School offered little escape. Fatima did well academically, not out of passion, but out of necessity. Achievement became her shield. It gave her value when her voice did not. Teachers praised her responsibility, her quiet focus, her reliability. No one asked what it cost her to be those things. At home, praise was subtle and easily withdrawn. A good grade was expected. A mistake was remembered. Fatima learned to associate worth with performance, love with compliance. She believed that if she tried hard enough, stayed careful enough, she could maintain balance. She did not yet understand how fragile that balance was. The family's routine moved with practiced efficiency. Meals were shared without conversation that strayed too far from safety. Decisions were made above Fatima's head, explained only when necessary. She listened more than she spoke, observed more than she participated. Despite everything, she loved her parents. Not blindly but deeply. Children often do. She wanted their approval, their trust, their belief in her goodness. She assumed that effort would eventually earn understanding. That assumption shaped her. Fatima trusted structure because structure promised fairness. She believed that truth mattered because she needed it too. She believed that honesty protected people because without that belief, the world felt unstable. Her sister did not share those beliefs. She moved through life with instinct rather than caution. When consequences approached, she deflected. When responsibility threatened, she redirected. Fatima noticed this, quietly, filing it away as observation rather than accusation. She never imagined it would matter. The evening that would change everything began like any other. Ordinary, predictable, unremarkable. The kind of day that gave no warning of what it carried. Fatima moved through it on routine alone, unaware that her careful balance was about to collapse. The air outside had begun to shift, heavy with the promise of rain. Clouds gathered slowly, darkening the sky in layers. The world felt tense without explanation, as if holding its breath. Inside the house, that same tension existed, quieter but no less real. Fatima sensed it without knowing why. She felt it in the pauses, in the way attention lingered before moving on. She could not name it yet, but something had already begun. At 15, Fatima did not know that truth alone was not always enough. She did not know that love could falter under convenience. She did not know that belief could be redirected without evidence. She still believed that if something went wrong, it would be resolved through fairness, through listening, through care. She was wrong. That night would teach her how quickly protection could turn into punishment, how easily trust could be misplaced, how fast childhood could end when safety was withdrawn. But for now, Fatima remained unaware, still careful, still hopeful, still believing that the ground beneath her was solid. At 15, she stood at the edge of a life she did not yet recognize. And the storm was already forming. The lie did not arrive as a moment. It arrived as a process. It began quietly, long before anyone noticed its shape. Small shifts in attention, subtle changes in tone, a growing imbalance that Fatima sensed but could not yet define. She felt it in the way her parents' focus lingered longer on her sister, in the way questions aimed at Fatima carried an edge they did not carry elsewhere. At 15, Fatima had learned to notice patterns before outcomes. It was how she protected herself. She observed rather than assumed, absorbed rather than reacted. That instinct now told her something was wrong. Her sister had always known how to control a room without appearing to try. She understood timing, understood which emotions softened adults and which hardened them. She could shape a story through emphasis alone, stretching some parts thin while making others heavier than they deserved to be. Fatima watched this without judgment, believing it harmless. Believing that exaggeration and deflection were temporary behaviors, not tools. She did not yet understand how easily truth could be bent when it served comfort. The atmosphere in the house shifted subtly over days. Nothing explicit was said, yet Fatima felt herself being repositioned. Glances became assessments. Silence became suspicious. Neutral moments carried expectation. She replayed her recent actions in her mind, searching for error. She found none. Still, the unease remained. Fatima had always believed that innocence was self-evident, that honesty carried its own protection. She was beginning to learn how naive that belief was. Her sister's distress appeared suddenly, though its cause remained unclear. It surfaced at convenient moments, carefully placed where it would be noticed. Her parents responded instinctively, with concern that bordered on urgency. Fatima observed the shift in their energy, how worry sharpened their focus and narrowed their patience. In times of uncertainty, people often reach for the explanation that requires the least emotional work. Fatima did not know yet that she was about to become that explanation. The accusation did not need to be spoken clearly to take effect. It formed through implication, through suggestion, through the quiet reinforcement of assumption. Her sister's version of events aligned easily with what her parents already believed about their daughters. One emotional, one controlled, one expressive, one silent. Silence, Fatima learned, was easily mistaken for guilt. She noticed how questions were no longer framed with curiosity. They arrived weighted, expecting confirmation rather than clarity. She felt herself shrinking under their shape, trying to respond carefully without sounding defensive. Defensiveness, she knew, was dangerous. Her sister's story grew more solid with repetition. Each retelling smoothed its edges, filled its gaps. What began as implication hardened into narrative. The truth, by contrast, remained fragile, dependent on trust rather than performance. Fatima felt a quiet panic rise within her, unfamiliar and disorienting. She had never needed to defend herself against her own family before. The ground she stood on felt unstable, shifting under her feet. She tried to understand what had motivated the lie. Fear, perhaps. Or convenience. Or the instinct to preserve affection at any cost. Whatever its origin, the result was the same. Responsibility moved away from where it belonged and settled squarely on Fatima. Her parents did not see the process unfolding. They saw only an outcome, that made sense to them. A version of events that fit comfortably into their understanding of the world. Accepting it required no reassessment, no disruption of belief. Fatima's protest lived only in her thoughts. She weighed every possible response and found each one insufficient. Speaking felt risky. Silence felt dangerous. She was trapped between two failures. She had never felt more 15 than in that moment. Old enough to be blamed, too young to be trusted. The storm outside continued to build unnoticed. Clouds thickened, the air growing heavy and charged. Inside the house, another storm took shape, quieter but far more destructive. Fatima sensed it reaching its conclusion. She did not yet know what form it would take, only that the lie had gained momentum. And momentum, once established, was difficult to stop. Her trust in fairness cracked, just slightly. Enough to let doubt seep in. Enough to change how she looked at the people she loved. She realized then that truth alone was not enough. It needed protection. And she no longer had it. At 15, Fatima stood at the center of a story she did not choose, watching a lie become solid while her own reality thinned around her. The storm was no longer approaching. It was already here. The decision did not arrive with discussion. It arrived as conclusion. By the time Fatima realized what was happening, the outcome had already been chosen. The lie had done its work quietly and efficiently, reshaping perception until no alternative explanation felt necessary. What remained was action, stripped of hesitation. The house felt different then. Familiar walls seemed distant, unrecognizable. The air inside carried a tension sharper than anything outside. Fatima moved through rooms she had known all her life with a growing sense of displacement, as if she were already leaving. She noticed how quickly certainty replaced doubt, how easily authority settled into judgment. There was no pause for reflection, no space carved out for understanding. The comfort of believing one story over another proved too strong. Fatima stood at the edge of that certainty, unable to cross into it, unable to dismantle it. Her truth existed, whole and intact, but it no longer mattered. It had been outweighed by convenience. The storm outside intensified. Wind battered the windows. Rain streaked across glass with force. The sound of it filled the house, urgent and demanding. It was the kind of weather that asked people to stay inside, to gather, to protect one another. Fatima was not included in that instinct. She felt time compress, moments folding into one another, without clarity. Movement replaced explanation. Her body responded before her mind fully caught up. She gathered what little she could, more out of reflex than intention. Each step felt unreal, detached from meaning. She reached the threshold of the house, the boundary between known and unknown. The place where she had once felt safe now stood firm against her, unyielding. The space that had shaped her was releasing her without care. The door became more than an object. It became decision made permanent. When it closed behind her, the sound cut cleanly through the storm. Sharp. Final. It echoed in a way that lodged deep within her chest, imprinting itself as memory. The world outside consumed her immediately. Rain soaked her clothes within seconds, cold seeping through fabric and skin alike. Wind pushed against her body with force, unbalanced and relentless. The ground beneath her feet was unstable, mud forming quickly, pulling her downward with each step. Fatima stood still for a moment, stunned. Not by the storm, but by the realization that she had truly been left. There was no expectation of return, no indication that this was temporary. The separation was complete. Fear arrived then, late but powerful. It rose from her stomach into her chest, tightening her breath. Her body trembled, reacting to cold and shock simultaneously. Still, she did not cry. Something inside her had gone very quiet. She began to move, not with direction but with instinct. Remaining still felt dangerous. Each step forward was an act of survival rather than choice. The night blurred around her, shapes dissolving into darkness and rain. The storm erased familiar landmarks quickly. Streets she knew transformed under water and shadow. The world felt vast and hostile, unconcerned with her fear or her age. Fatima's thoughts fractured under pressure. Images of home surfaced and vanished. Questions formed without answers. How something so small had led here. How truth had failed her so completely. She felt anger briefly, sharp and bright, before it dissolved into something heavier. Confusion. Grief. A deep sense of betrayal that settled into her bones. At 15, she understood then what it meant to be unprotected. The storm did not slow. It pressed forward with unwavering force, indifferent to her struggle. Rain filled her shoes, chilled her feet, numbed her senses. Her hair clung to her face, her vision narrowing as exhaustion crept in. She pushed on, driven by the simple need to stay upright, to remain conscious. Survival stripped life down to its most basic requirement. Keep moving. Keep breathing. Behind her, the house remained sealed, its lights glowing faintly through the rain. Ahead of her lay only darkness and noise. The door had closed, and with it, a chapter of her life ended without ceremony. At 15, Fatima stepped fully into the storm, carrying nothing but her truth and the growing realization that no one inside that house was coming after her. The storm did not simply surround Fatima. It claimed her. With every step forward, her strength diminished in ways she could feel but not measure. Her body moved on instinct now, no longer guided by thought or intention. Cold settled deep into her muscles, slowing them, dulling the sharpness she relied on to stay upright. The rain fell without rhythm, heavy and relentless. It blurred the boundary between sky and ground until everything felt suspended in motion. Fatima's breath came shallow, her chest tightening with each inhale. The air felt heavier than it should have, thick with moisture and resistance. Her clothes clung to her skin, soaked beyond discomfort, pulling her down with their weight. The fabric scraped against her legs as she walked, each movement demanding more energy than she had left. Her shoes filled completely, water sloshing with every step, numbing her feet until sensation faded into a distant ache. Fatima's awareness narrowed. The world became fragments. The sound of rain striking pavement, the pressure of wind against her shoulders, the faint burn in her lungs as she fought to draw breath. She stumbled more than once. Each time, she caught herself just before falling, hands scraping against wet surfaces, knees buckling under strain. The ground felt unforgiving, slick with mud and runoff. A single fall could mean the end of her forward momentum, and she understood that without fully articulating it. Fear shifted shape inside her. It was no longer sharp or panicked. It became slow and heavy, settling into her chest like an anchor. The kind of fear that did not scream, but whispered persistence. Fatima thought of nothing specific. Her mind refused complexity. There was no room for memory, no space for regret. Survival demanded simplicity. Her vision blurred as exhaustion deepened. Streetlights appeared and disappeared, distorted through rain and fatigue. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending and dissolving as she passed them. She could no longer tell how far she had walked or how long she had been outside. Time lost its meaning. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She tried to steady them, pressing them against her body, but the shaking continued. Cold had worked its way into her core, impossible to escape. The storm showed no sign of easing. Wind surged in unpredictable bursts, forcing her to brace herself repeatedly. More than once, it pushed her sideways, nearly sending her to the ground. She leaned into it instinctively, adjusting her posture without conscious thought. Fatima felt smaller than she ever had. Not emotionally, but physically. Reduced to something fragile moving through an environment that did not acknowledge her presence. Her thoughts finally fractured enough to allow a single realization to surface. She might not make it through the night. The understanding arrived calmly, without drama. It did not frighten her in the way she expected. Instead, it hollowed her out, replacing effort with weariness. Her steps slowed despite her will to continue. Her body began to fail her in subtle ways. Her legs responded more slowly to command. Her balance faltered even on stable ground. Her breath grew uneven, shallow and irregular. She searched instinctively for shelter, though she did not know what form it might take. A doorway, an overhang, anything to break the wind and rain. Her eyes scanned the darkness desperately, but the storm obscured everything. Fatima stumbled again, this time falling to one knee. Pain flared briefly, sharp and then muted by cold. She tried to stand immediately, but her legs resisted, shaking violently beneath her. For the first time, tears mixed with the rain on her face. They were not emotional. They were involuntary, a physical response to overwhelm. She forced herself up, using a nearby surface for support. Her hands slipped, fingers barely gripping. Panic flickered at the edges of her consciousness, but she pushed it down. Panic wasted energy she could not afford. She took another step, then another. The storm seemed endless, a moving wall of sound and force. Fatima felt herself fading within it, becoming just another shape swallowed by rain and darkness. Her strength thinned dangerously. Somewhere ahead, unseen and unknown, help existed or did not. Fate balanced quietly, indifferent to her struggle. At 15, Fatima walked on, unaware that this was the moment she came closest to disappearing. Fatima no longer remembered deciding to stop. Her body made the choice for her. Her legs slowed first, movements turning uncoordinated and uneven. Each step required deliberate effort, as though she were moving through resistance thicker than air. The storm pressed against her from every direction, erasing sound except for its own. She reached the edge of a small roadside area, barely distinguishable through the rain. The lights there glowed dimly, distorted by water and exhaustion. Fatima leaned forward instinctively, placing her hands on her knees as her breath faltered. The simple act of standing upright felt like an achievement beyond her reach. Her vision narrowed until the world became a tunnel of motion and shadow. The ground beneath her felt uncertain, tilting slightly even though it remained flat. She swayed, catching herself just before falling again. The cold had moved past discomfort into something more dangerous. It numbed her reactions, dulled her urgency. The instinct to keep moving weakened, replaced by a heavy desire to rest, to stop fighting the storm and let it pass over her. Fatima lowered herself carefully, her back pressing against a hard surface she could not clearly identify. The contact grounded her briefly, sending a dull ache through her spine. Rain continued to soak her without pause, running down her face, pooling at her feet. She closed her eyes for a moment too long. When she opened them again, the world felt slower, distant. Sounds arrived late, stretched and indistinct. Her hands lay limp in her lap, fingers barely responding when she tried to curl them. Somewhere beyond her awareness, movement occurred. She did not notice it at first. Her senses were too overwhelmed to register change. Only when the shape blocked part of the rain did her mind stir, responding to the sudden interruption in pattern. A figure stood nearby, partially shielded, unmoving at first. The storm bent around its presence, rain scattering differently, wind shifting slightly. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Fatima tried to focus, blinking repeatedly. Her eyes struggled to adjust, refusing clarity. She registered height before detail, then the outline of shoulders, then the faint contrast of fabric darker than the night behind it. The figure moved closer, cautiously, as if aware of her fragility. Fatima felt the shift in air, the warmth of proximity barely perceptible but real. Her body reacted before her mind did. A faint tension returned to her muscles, a quiet alertness reawakening. Survival instinct flickered again, weak but present. She attempted to move, to straighten herself, but her limbs responded slowly. The effort drained what little strength she had regained. Her head tipped forward slightly, chin dropping toward her chest. The figure knelt beside her. Fatima sensed the nearness fully now. The storm still raged, but its dominance felt interrupted. Something else had entered the space, something solid and deliberate. She felt a gentle pressure against her arm, steadying her. The contact was careful, controlled, nothing rushed or forceful. It anchored her, keeping her from slipping sideways onto the wet ground. Her breathing stuttered, then steadied slightly. The simple presence of another human altered the rhythm of her body, reminding it that it was not entirely alone. Fatima's awareness sharpened just enough to absorb the reality of being seen. Noticed. The figure remained with her, not retreating, not overwhelmed by the storm or her condition. There was no visible hesitation, no sign of dismissal. Only attentiveness. Rain continued to fall around them, but its sound felt less suffocating now. Fatima leaned unconsciously toward the support at her side, surrendering some of her weight. Her body accepted the help without resistance. Exhaustion swept through her again, deeper than before, but this time it did not feel final. It felt held. Her eyes fluttered closed, then opened again. She focused on the ground in front of her, on the pattern of water flowing past, grounding herself in small details. She did not know who had stopped. She did not know why. She only knew that someone had chosen not to look away. At 15, soaked and shaking beneath a relentless storm, Fatima remained alive because one person noticed her presence in a world that had already turned its back. And somewhere far away, the consequences of that moment had already begun to take shape. The movement away from the storm happened slowly, deliberately. Fatima was lifted with care, her weight supported evenly to keep her upright. Her feet dragged at first, unresponsive and numb, but gradually began to follow the direction she was guided. The sensation of motion felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Rain still struck her face, but less directly now. Something shielded her, redirecting the downpour so it no longer pressed against her eyes and mouth. The change was subtle, but significant. Her breathing eased, each inhale less labored than before. She felt warmth for the first time in what felt like hours. It was faint, almost imagined, but it spread slowly through her arms and shoulders. Her body reacted instinctively, leaning into it, seeking more. Her surroundings blurred past without detail. Light shifted from dim to slightly brighter, then dim again. The storm's sound softened, its intensity reduced by walls or barriers she could not see. Fatima became aware of a door opening, the change in air immediate and profound. Wind cut off sharply, rain reduced to a distant roar. The world compressed into something quieter, contained. She was guided inside. The air within was thick with stillness. Dryness replaced wetness, and the absence of wind felt startling. Fatima's ears rang briefly as her senses adjusted to the sudden calm. Her body trembled more violently now that the storm no longer masked it. Cold that had been held at bay by movement surged forward, demanding attention. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, muscles spasming as warmth attempted to return. She was lowered carefully onto a surface that did not shift beneath her weight. It was solid, steady, a contrast to the unstable ground she had walked on for so long. The simple reliability of it brought unexpected relief. Fatima sat hunched, arms wrapped loosely around herself. Water dripped steadily from her clothes, forming small pools beneath her feet. The sound felt intrusive in the quiet space. Something was placed around her shoulders, heavy and dry. The texture was rough but comforting, absorbing moisture and holding warmth close. Fatima inhaled deeply, the air no longer sharp or biting. Her thoughts returned slowly, piece by piece. The fog in her mind thinned, allowing awareness to settle back in. She realized she was no longer in immediate danger. The understanding loosened something tight in her chest. Fatima lifted her head slightly, taking in her surroundings with cautious curiosity. The space was simple, functional. There were no signs of luxury or excess. Everything appeared purposeful, designed to protect rather than impress. The storm remained audible beyond the walls, but its power felt diminished now. It was no longer pressing against her directly. It had been pushed back, contained. She felt another presence nearby, close enough to matter. Not looming, not distant. Steady. Grounded. Fatima's body relaxed incrementally. Her shoulders dropped, tension easing from muscles that had been clenched for too long. Exhaustion settled in fully now, heavier but safer than before. She became aware of how much she hurt. Not sharply, but deeply. Every joint ached, every muscle protested movement. The pain felt earned, evidence of endurance rather than injury. Her breathing evened out, falling into a slow, steady rhythm. Each breath confirmed that she was still here, still alive. Time stretched gently in that space. Fatima did not know how long she sat there, wrapped in warmth, listening to the storm lose its immediacy. Minutes passed, perhaps longer. For the first time since leaving her house, she felt something close to safety. The realization did not bring relief alone. It brought confusion. Why this person had stopped. Why they had chosen to help. Why the world, so harsh moments before, had softened just enough to let her survive. Fatima's trust did not return immediately. It hovered at a distance, cautious and bruised. But it existed. At 15, soaked, exhausted, and displaced, Fatima rested in a space she had not expected to find, sheltered by someone whose presence would soon change far more than the course of her night. Fatima's awareness returned in fragments. At first, she noticed warmth spreading unevenly through her body, uncomfortable but necessary. Sensation returned to her fingers in slow pulses, each one sharp enough to remind her how close she had come to losing feeling entirely. Her toes burned faintly, aching as circulation struggled back into them. She shifted slightly, testing her balance. The surface beneath her remained steady. The blanket around her shoulders had been adjusted at some point, wrapped more securely than before. She had not noticed when it happened. The storm continued outside, but it no longer felt dominant. Its presence had faded into background noise, something distant rather than consuming. Fatima lifted her head further now, her movements cautious. Fatigue still weighed heavily on her, but her mind had cleared enough to observe. That was when she truly saw the person who had saved her. The recognition did not arrive as shock. It arrived as disbelief. Her thoughts stalled, struggling to reconcile memory with reality. The face in front of her belonged to someone she had not seen in years, someone whose existence had faded into the background of family history. Someone rarely spoken about, mentioned only in passing, and without warmth. Her uncle. The realization shifted something deep inside her. Confusion layered over gratitude, followed quickly by discomfort. This was not the outcome she would have imagined in any version of the night she had lived through. He stood nearby, not watching her closely, not hovering. His posture was reserved, almost hesitant, as if he were unsure how much space to take. There was no pride in his presence, no expectation of acknowledgement. Time had changed him. His hair showed streaks of gray she did not remember. Lines had settled into his face, marking years Fatima had not witnessed. Yet the familiarity remained undeniable. Memories surfaced uninvited. Childhood moments faint and incomplete. A voice she once recognized easily. A presence that had disappeared quietly from her life without explanation. She had never asked where he went. She had learned early that some questions were discouraged simply by silence. Now he was here. The weight of that fact pressed against her chest, heavier than the blanket around her shoulders. Of all the people in the world, it was him who had noticed her in the storm. Him who had stopped. Him who had chosen to help when her own family had not. Fatima's emotions tangled uncomfortably. Gratitude rose first, undeniable and powerful. Without him, she would not be sitting here now. That truth settled firmly. But alongside it came something sharper. A quiet, aching confusion. Why him? Why now? Why had it taken a storm and abandonment for their paths to cross again? She wondered if he had recognized her immediately, or if she had simply been another figure in the rain until closer inspection revealed her identity. The thought unsettled her. Her uncle moved with restraint, his actions careful and minimal. He did not intrude into her space. He did not demand attention. Everything about him suggested awareness of boundaries, as if he understood how fragile she was in that moment. Fatima realized then that he had not asked anything of her. Not for explanation. Not for gratitude. Not even for acknowledgement. He had acted without condition. The contrast between that and what she had experienced earlier struck her deeply. Her parents' certainty,
Her sister's lie.
the ease with which she had been cast out, and now this quiet, unassuming care from someone who owed her nothing. Fatima felt something inside her loosen painfully. The emotional weight she had been holding back pressed forward, threatening to overwhelm her. She forced herself to breathe slowly, grounding herself in the present. She was safe for now. That had to be enough. Her uncle's presence remained steady, unchanged by her observation. He carried himself with a subdued seriousness, the kind shaped by experience rather than authority. Fatima understood instinctively that this moment mattered far beyond the night itself. That whatever had separated him from her family in the past had not erased his sense of responsibility toward her. She did not know yet how deeply his involvement would cut into old wounds. She did not know how this night would ripple outward, reshaping relationships and exposing truths long buried.
But she sensed the shift.
At 15, exhausted and wrapped in borrowed warmth, Fatima came face to face with the person who would later force her parents to confront what they had done. And far away, in a house that still glowed with certainty built on a lie, consequences were already moving quietly toward them. The night did not end with Fatima finding shelter. It extended outward, reaching beyond the walls that protected her now, moving toward the people who believed their decisions were settled. Her uncle did not rush what came next. Everything unfolded with deliberate care, as if he understood that urgency could do more harm than delay. Fatima remained seated, wrapped in warmth, her body slowly stabilizing. Color returned to her skin in faint traces, and the trembling eased into manageable shivers. The storm outside continued, but its role had changed. It no longer felt like an enemy. It had become a backdrop, a reminder of what she had endured rather than what still threatened her. Fatima sensed movement nearby, purposeful but restrained. She did not need to watch to understand that steps were being taken on her behalf. The awareness brought an unfamiliar sensation, being protected without having to ask. Time passed quietly, enough for her breathing to even out, enough for her thoughts to settle into something closer to clarity. Fatima replayed the events of the evening in fragments, each one carrying a strange distance, as though it had happened to someone else. The house she had been expelled from existed now as a concept rather than a place. Its warmth felt imaginary, its authority weakened by what had followed. Elsewhere, that authority was about to be tested. The call reached her parents without warning, cutting into the certainty they had wrapped themselves in. It arrived as an intrusion, unexpected and unwelcome. The voice on the other end carried weight not because of volume, but because of who it belonged to. Her uncle's name reopened doors they had long believed closed. At first, disbelief held firm. Their version of events had settled comfortably into place, reinforced by repetition and emotion. It had not been questioned, and therefore had not been examined. The idea that something had gone wrong felt impossible. Then details surfaced. Not accusations. Not confrontation. Just facts. Calm, measured, unyielding. A storm severe enough to ground judgment. A 15-year-old found alone and barely conscious. A body chilled beyond safety. A child abandoned. Those facts did not bend. Certainty began to fracture. Fatima's father felt it first, a subtle tremor beneath confidence. His hands shook slightly, not from anger, but from a dawning realization that something irreversible had occurred. The weight of responsibility shifted suddenly, pressing down in a way he could not redirect. Her mother's certainty faltered differently. It resisted longer, clinging to familiar logic, to explanations that had felt sufficient only hours earlier. But logic weakened under the gravity of consequence. The lie that had protected one child now threatened to expose them all. Back in the quiet space where Fatima rested, she sensed nothing of this unraveling yet. She remained focused inward, conserving energy, listening to the steady rhythm of safety around her. She did not know that her absence had begun to speak louder than her presence ever had. The storm had stripped away the illusion of control. What remained was truth, raw and unsoftened. and it was moving toward the people who had believed themselves immune to it. At 15, Fatima sat in borrowed shelter while the certainty that expelled her cracked under the weight of what it had caused. The arrival happened without drama, yet its weight filled every corner of the space. Fatima sensed the change before she saw it. The air shifted, tension entering quietly, carried in by familiar presences she had not expected to face so soon. Her body reacted instinctively, muscles tightening, breath catching slightly as memory and fear stirred together. Her parents stood just inside the doorway, visibly altered by what they were witnessing. The certainty they had carried earlier was gone. Their eyes moved to Fatima immediately, drawn to her small, wrapped form seated against the solid reassurance of shelter. The blanket around her shoulders, the lingering pallor of her skin, the exhaustion etched into her posture told a story no explanation could soften. Her father froze where he stood. The sight of her struck him physically. His shoulders sagged as if something heavy had settled there all at once. His hands trembled, fingers flexing unconsciously, unable to hide the shock that rippled through him. The image in front of him did not match the narrative he had accepted so easily. This was not defiance. This was damage. Her mother's reaction unfolded more slowly. Her expression shifted in stages, denial giving way to confusion dissolving into something dangerously close to recognition. She took in the details she had not allowed herself to imagine earlier. The wet shoes placed nearby, the redness around Fatima's wrists, the way her daughter avoided direct eye contact, not from guilt, but from exhaustion. The lie could not survive this moment intact. Fatima did not move toward them. She did not shrink away either. She remained where she was, still and quiet, her presence more powerful than any protest she could have voiced. Her silence now was not weakness. It was testimony. Her uncle stood slightly apart, grounded and composed. His presence acted as a boundary, a reminder that this situation was no longer contained within family walls where denial could thrive. The world had witnessed what had happened. Fatima felt exposed, but not unprotected. The difference mattered. Her father took a step forward, then stopped. His instinct to reach for her collided with the weight of what he had done. The hesitation spoke volumes. It revealed regret forming too late to erase consequence. Her mother's gaze flickered, moving between Fatima and her uncle, searching for something to hold on to. An explanation. A way to reframe. But there was nowhere left to place the blame. The storm outside had weakened, its fury spent. Inside, the reckoning intensified. Fatima studied their faces carefully, detached in a way that surprised even her. She felt no surge of relief, no rush of vindication. What she felt instead was a quiet confirmation. She had been right to trust herself. She had not imagined the injustice. The child they had believed capable of wrongdoing sat before them, visibly harmed by their choice. That truth settled heavily. Her father's breathing grew uneven, his composure slipping further. The weight of responsibility pressed into him with undeniable force. His hands shook more visibly now, no longer something he could ignore or control. Fatima saw him then not as authority, but as someone confronting a version of himself he could not accept. The realization created distance between them, a space that could not be crossed easily. Her mother's posture softened, though not fully. Guilt approached cautiously, as if afraid of what it would demand once allowed in. No one spoke.
None of them needed to.
The night had already said everything. At 15, wrapped in warmth provided by someone else, Fatima watched her parents finally see the cost of believing a lie. And for the first time since the storm began, the balance of power shifted quietly back toward her. The night did not end with apologies or explanations. It ended with understanding settling into places where certainty once lived. Fatima remained seated, wrapped in warmth, while the adults around her adjusted to a reality they could no longer avoid. The power that had once belonged to assumption drained quietly from the room, leaving behind something heavier and far less comfortable. Her parents did not rush toward her. They did not try to undo the distance that had formed between them in a single moment. Something had shifted too deeply for that. The storm had stripped away more than fear. It had exposed fracture lines that had always existed beneath the surface. Fatima felt strangely calm. The fear that had carried her through the night had burned itself out. In its place remained clarity, a grounded awareness of what had been lost and what could never return to its original form. Trust, once broken in such a way, did not regenerate easily. Her uncle remained steady, an unmoving presence beside her. He did not claim victory or validation. His role had never been about being right. It had been about being there when it mattered. That distinction stayed with Fatima. She understood then that love was not defined by proximity or authority, but by action taken when it carried risk, by who stepped forward in the storm and who chose to stay inside. The lie that had begun this night unraveled fully under the weight of consequence. Its usefulness evaporated when confronted with physical truth. There was no space left for it to hide. Fatima's parents faced a reckoning they could not outsource or soften. The image of their daughter alone in the storm would remain with them far longer than any justification they might have once clung to. It etched itself into memory, reshaping how they would see her forever. Fatima did not feel triumph. She felt distance. Not emotional coldness, but a quiet separation that came from seeing people clearly for the first time. She recognized her parents as flawed, capable of harm not because they were cruel, but because they were human and afraid of disruption. That understanding did not heal the wound. It simply named it. The night closed slowly. The storm faded completely, leaving behind a damp stillness that felt unfamiliar after so much chaos. Morning would come eventually, indifferent to what had changed. Fatima knew she would not be the same girl who had been sent out into the rain. That version of herself belonged to a world where trust was unconditional and safety assumed. What emerged instead was someone quieter, more observant, less willing to surrender truth for comfort. The storm had taken many things from her. Innocence, simplicity, blind faith. But it had also given her something rare. The knowledge that her survival did not depend on being believed by everyone, only on being believed by herself, and by the few who chose to see her clearly. At 15, Fatima stepped out of that night changed forever. Not broken, not defeated, but awake. Life did not return to normal after that night. It moved forward, altered in ways that were not always visible, but always present. Fatima carried the storm with her long after the skies cleared. Not as fear, but as memory. A reminder etched into her awareness of how quickly safety could disappear and how unexpectedly it could be restored by the right hands. She did not speak often about what happened, not because it no longer mattered, but because some truths lose their power when explained too many times. The night lived inside her as understanding rather than story. Her relationship with her parents changed quietly. There was care, there was effort, but there was also distance. A space that could not be crossed simply by regret. Fatima learned that love could exist alongside damage, and that forgiveness did not always mean restoration. What endured most was the lesson the storm taught her. That strength did not announce itself loudly. That protection sometimes came from the least expected place. That being right did not always keep you safe, but knowing yourself could keep you alive. Fatima grew older with a sharper sense of the world. She listened more closely. She trusted her instincts sooner. She understood that her worth did not depend on approval, nor did her survival depend on being believed by everyone. The night her parents left her in the storm did not define her by what was taken. It defined her by what remained. Resilience,
clarity,
and the quiet courage to stand in the truth even when the world turned away. The storm passed. Fatima did not forget it. She became someone who could walk through the next one without losing herself.